that I have command of all my faculties, that I don't need notes, I don't need teleprompter. I can go out and answer any questions at all.
Did he really just say he had to prove whether or not he has command of all of his faculties? This is a horrible place to be in.
I'd like to start with the horrible events of last weekend. It has shocked a lot of Americans. A political rally, your opponent, Donald Trump, shot in the middle of greeting his supporters. You spoke to Mr. Trump afterward. Can you give me a sense of that conversation?
Very cordial. I told him how concerned I was and wanted to make sure I knew how he was actually doing. He sounded good. He said he was fine, and he thanked me for calling him. I told him he was literally in the prayers of Jill and me, and I hope his whole family was weathering this.
You were in Delaware when this happened. What was your first reaction?
There's no place at all for violence in politics in America. None. Zero. And we've reached a point where it's too commonplace, not assassinations, but to talk about it. For example, the January 6th, the attack on the Capitol.
You called your opponent an existential threat. On a call a week ago, you said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate the
I didn't say
words
crosshairs. I was talking about focus on it. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there's very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term was bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said, I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that won't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win. How do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses. I'm not out there making fun of Donald Trump when Nancy Pelosi's husband was hit with a hammer, joking about it.
This doesn't sound like you're turning down the heat, though. You've talked about
No. Look, when I'm turning down, we have to stop the whole notion that there are certain things that are contrary to our democracy that we're for. The idea of saying, I didn't win the election, when every court in the land said, including this conservative Supreme Court, said we won.
Can you and what will you do, at least things you can control, to lower down the temperature, the rhetoric out there?
I'll tell you what he should do. The Democrats at this point have surrendered. Donald Trump just had an attempted assassination against him, and he literally had the most historic picture taken with him with his fist in the air, the American flag right behind him, while he's being flanked by the Secret Service. And people are already criticizing him when he's like, fight, fight, fight. I mean, I don't know how you'd react after getting shot. I'd be probably pretty pissed. And he used that moment to actually rally his supporters, like, don't give up. This tit for tat, it just seems like he's pointing the finger, being like, hey, Donald Trump has said some really fucked up things. And I'm going to continue to say he's an existential threat to our democracy, even though I'm convinced at this point that the Democrats don't actually believe this, because the calls of Joe Biden stepping down have been muted in light of these new circumstances. But if you truly believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, the Democrats wouldn't just unilaterally surrender and being like, it looks like to us it's just going to be another Donald Trump term. No, if you thought that, you would be like, no, we have to switch nominees. We got to do something, change the dynamics of the race. But if senior Democrats are just surrendering at this point, then they don't actually believe Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Everything he just listed there are valid criticisms. Donald Trump's an asshole. It's obvious. But the Republicans have said, that's my asshole. What's the biggest criticism you have of Donald Trump? I think the worst thing he didn't accept his loss during the 2020 election. I agree with that. But for them to point at the Capitol riots and be like this, he tried to overthrow the election. Normally, coups look very different. The leader of the country who is refusing to lead gets the military on their side, and then he takes the military and has them go depose the sitting government of the United States. Donald Trump didn't even attempt this.
Continue to talk about the things that matter to the American public. It matters whether or not you accept the outcome of elections. It matters whether or not you, for example, talk about how you're going to deal with the border instead of talking about people as being vermin and all. I mean, those things matter. That's the kind of language that is inflammatory.
I hate Donald Trump's rhetoric. It's really bad at times. And he said in one of his rallies that his political opponents are like vermin. This is really fucked up things to say when you're possibly going to be the sitting president of the United States. Hopefully what just happened was a little bit of a wake-up call to everybody, being like, we should all try to tone down our rhetoric and not allude to violence or refer to people who we disagree with as vermin. Stop saying someone's an existential threat to the country. Even if you believe that, the Democratic Party's actions say very differently.
Has this shooting changed the trajectory of this race?
I don't know, and you don't know either.
I don't know, but something you've given thought to?
No, I've thought less about the trajectory of the case than two things. One, what his health is, that was secure, number one. And number two, what happens from here on in terms of the kind of coverage. I've never seen a circumstance where you ride through certain rural areas of the country and people have signs there, big Trump signs with middle signs saying F Biden, and a little kid standing there putting up his middle finger. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that is just inflammatory and a kind of viciousness. It's a very different thing than to say, look, I really disagree with Trump's the way he takes care of taxes, the way he wants a $5 trillion tax cut for people who are making a lot of money next time around. Doesn't focus on working class people.
Okay, I think that is kind of messed up that there are signs printed saying like F Joe Biden. There are literally people driving around with cardboard cutouts of Joe Biden in their trucks. Like, this is really inflammatory and effed up stuff to do. Donald Trump has fed off of it. But Joe Biden feeds off of it too, famously saying, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. And it sucks because our political discourse just focuses on what divides us, not what unites us. We're Americans. We all should be in this together. But we also have free speech in this country. And if people want to make a sign saying F Joe Biden, doesn't mean I agree with it, doesn't mean I support it, but they have that right.
Another question, if I can, about Saturday. Of course, the former president was wounded. One of his supporters died. A couple more people were seriously injured. Was this a massive security failure?
Yes.
I have had 2 meetings in the Situation Room with all the intelligence communities, the FBI, Secret Service, et cetera, and I've asked for a totally independent analysis.
You have confidence in the Secret Service? Do you feel safe?
I feel safe with the Secret Service, but look, you saw what we did see was the Secret Service who responded risked their lives in responding. They're ready to give their lives to the president. The question is, should they have anticipated what happened? Should they have done what they needed to do to prevent this from happening? That's a question. That's an open question.
And Judge Cannon dismissed the documents case, as you may have heard, in Mar-a-Lago. Can I first get your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised. It comes from the immunity decision the Supreme Court ruled on, and Clarence Thomas, in his dissent, said that independent prosecutors appointed by the Attorney General aren't legit. I had an independent prosecutor look at me. They spent months on mine going through, and I was totally cooperative in and out of my house. And there were, I don't know, the last time in, there were like 10, 12 agents in my house for 9 hours unaccompanied, going through every single thing I had. That's appropriate. And they looked at me and concluded I didn't do a damn thing wrong.
That's not true. That is not true. You know what they concluded? You were a sympathetic elderly man with memory problems. Hence, they don't think they would actually be able to get a jury to convict you because you did not have your mental faculties about you. Whether you were being dishonest when you were being interviewed by the special counsel, not to mention you told your ghostwriter that I had classified documents I'm supposed to return, but they're somewhere in my house. Yes, Joe Biden did not actually try to hide documents that Donald Trump allegedly did, but in essence, they committed the same crime. Both took classified documents they weren't supposed to hold on to after they left the presidency, but Donald Trump is being prosecuted for it, and the reason you weren't prosecuted for it is because you're a sympathetic elderly man with memory problems, but you still want to be president for 4 more years.
In light of this decision, the delay in the Georgia case, the Supreme Court decision on immunity, which you referenced, the former president has seen a series of legal wins recently. You've actively campaigned on his legal woes. Can you do anything like that anymore?
Sure. I can talk about what I think is appropriate. I think the Supreme Court made a terrible decision.
We literally had you as vice president who did nothing when President Obama was drone striking American citizens. Last time I checked, I think we were innocent until proven guilty in this country. And you could say this dude was a terrorist and he did a bunch of horrible things, but he's a United States citizen. He's entitled to due process. And President Obama managed to get the case dismissed on national security grounds. Is the Supreme Court's ruling dangerous? I don't really know. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like to me, the presidents have been pushing the bounds of executive power for a very long time. But since Donald Trump's probably going to be president again, all of a sudden we're concerned about it.
Before this violent turn of events over the weekend, the talk, as you know, was about you and your future, if you should stay in the race. Your allies, James Clyburn, Nancy Pelosi, have kind of put it out there that they're waiting for your decision, giving you time to make your decision. What I hear from you is that you made your decision. Are you still comfortable in that decision? Has anything changed in the last several days?
No.
It's very interesting because Nancy Pelosi initially came out and said, we will fully embrace Joe Biden continuing on in this election cycle and we will support him as the candidate. Then she goes on TV and changes her mind when told that, hey, Joe Biden has no intention of stepping down. He's going to be the Democratic nominee. And she's like, well, he needs to make that decision. Well, he's already made the decision. So why are we saying that he needs to make a decision? Have the gloves come off and they're actually going to try to push Joe Biden now. And the Democrats are thinking, if we can at least have control of one of the three branches of government, the Congress, if Donald Trump does try to implement 2025, even though he says he disagrees with it, he's probably going to get tied up in court. So if they can just have the legislative branch, there would be a check on Donald Trump's power. So that's why behind the scenes, Nancy Pelosi is probably trying to push Joe Biden out. And she's trying to do it in the nice way by saying, why don't you just step down because of your own volition, rather than us doing something that in recent times is unprecedented.
What do you make of people like Nancy Pelosi, though, who seem to be of the opinion that there is a window for you to make this choice?
If you look at all the polling data shows a lot of different things, but there's no wide gap between us. It's essentially a toss-up race. One of the arguments that get made, you have the most successful presidency of any president in modern history, maybe since Franklin Roosevelt. Passed more major legislation no one thought could get done. We're able to put together a consensus. We're able to unite NATO. We're able to deal in for foreign policy. Why don't you just decide to rest on those laurels? And the answer is because the job's not finished.
If you watch my channel, my opinion, I don't think Joe Biden's the worst president ever. I think George W. Bush was way worse than Joe Biden. And he has done good things. He got the Chip and Science Act passed. He got the Inflation Reduction Act passed. He got the PACT Act passed. There are real legislative wins with Joe Biden. You could argue his time in the Senate had served him well, and he learned ways to actually get people to work together and actually pass legislation. I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like to me he's even struggling in this interview. He wants us to give him another 4 years because he says the job's not done, when 72% of Americans think he is not mentally fit to continue in his presidency. I think with the attempt on Donald Trump's life, I think that's just going to make him more popular, and I think that's ball game if you're Joe Biden.
Weathered the storm on this issue of whether you should be on the ticket or not?
14 million people voted for me to be the nominee.
Okay, I had to stop him there. 14 million people voted for you because you're the only Democrat they knew on that ticket. They didn't know Dean Phillips. They didn't know Marianne Williamson. Florida shut down their primaries and just declared you the winner. Then you even had this sad write-in campaign. For you to tout these normie Americans who don't even know who Dean Phillips is or know who Marianne Williamson is because you refused to actually debate them, maybe that would have been a good idea for you to get some practice in before you had that debate performance against Donald Trump. And if you're shutting down primaries, stop saying Donald Trump's the threat to democracy, because you're just a hypocrite.
In your last TV interview, you were asked if you had watched the debate, and your answer was, I don't think so, no. Have you since seen it?
I've seen pieces of it. I've not watched the whole debate.
And the reason I ask, because I guess the question is, are you all on the same page? Are you seeing what they saw?
Why don't you guys ever talk about the 28 lies he told? Why didn't the press ever talk about that? 28 times it's confirmed he lied in that debate.
Because you froze on stage. You had your mouth gaping open when Donald Trump was saying something. You couldn't rebut him lying. How the American people are going to know the difference and just rely on mainstream media to tell them, hey, Donald Trump lied this many times. Also, I personally wasn't a fan when you said no service members have died during your presidency. Did you forget about those people who died in an Iranian proxy drone attack? Or are you just lying? Both were pretty bad.
I had a bad night. I wasn't feeling well at all. And I had been, without making it, I screwed up. But
I just asked the question because the idea that you may or may not have seen what some of these other folks have seen, you're not on the same.
I'd have to see I was there.
Okay, that was
I'd have
funny.
to see it, I was there. And by the way, seriously, you won't answer the question, but why didn't the press talk about all the lies he told? I didn't know anything about that.
We have reported many of the issues that came up in that debate.
No, you haven't.
We'll provide you with them.
God love you.
Okay. President Obama put out a statement after the debate, but should he and Michelle Obama be doing more to express their confidence in you?
No, they're helping me. They've helped me from the beginning. This is my job to get this done.
Have you talked to him since this issue came to light?
I don't think, I may have. I don't think so.
I don't like that answer, man. You should know whether you talked to your alleged best friend, President Obama, about how you did during that debate. Also, let's keep in mind when he says President Obama has helped him out from the beginning. Bernie Sanders very likely was going to win that primary until behind the scenes, President Obama was pressuring people to get out of the race and to coalesce and endorse you. And there have been talks behind the scenes that President Obama has actually told Joe Biden, hey, I think you should drop out. And he's just stubborn. He won't do it. And that happens in your later years. You get more stubborn.
Who do you listen to on deeply personal issues like the decisions whether to stay in the race or not?
Hunter Biden.
Me, the idea that I'm the old guy. I am. I'm old. But I'm only 3 years older than Trump, number one. And number two, my mental acuity's been pretty damn good. I've gotten more done than any president has in a long time, in 3.5 years. I understand why people say, God, he's 81 years old. Whoa. What's he going to be when he's 83 years old or 84 years old? It's a legitimate question to ask.
I think the presidency is worn on this man, and I don't think he can acknowledge it. Whereas Donald Trump, yeah, he's old too, but he's definitely full of charisma, and he wears it better than Joe Biden. But I think for them to push out Joe Biden and not have that talk with him, hey, Grandpa, we're taking away your keys. But in this instance, it's literally running the country. But he only listens to himself. Because if I were Joe Biden's loved one, I would be protective of him. And I would tell him, hey, you did a good job. You did the best you could. Retire and enjoy the rest of your life.
Former President Trump named his vice presidential pick, J D Vance. What does that tell you, his qualities? What does that tell you about former President Trump's values in terms of who he will surround himself with in the next administration should he win?
Well, it's not unusual. He's going to surround himself with people who agree completely with him. Even though if you go back and listen to the things that J D Vance said about Trump.
J D Vance alluded to Trump was America's Hitler. But at least shows he's not a yes man. And I've listened to interviews with J D Vance. This guy's slick and he's pretty sharp. And I don't think he's just a sycophant to Trump. I can't wait for the vice presidential debates because I think he will make Kamala Harris look foolish.
J D Vance has adopted the same policies. No exceptions on abortion, making sure that he supports the new $5 trillion tax cut that Trump wants to give in the next administration. Signing on to the whole notion of whether or not we're going to, he says there's no climate change happening. I mean, he signed on to the Trump agenda, which he should if he's running with Trump.
So Trump said he's giving you a chance to redeem yourself, basically the idea of engaging in another debate.
We're going to have another debate.
Yeah, you're going to have one in September that's on the books. Would you be open to doing one in the next few weeks?
I'm going to debate him when we agree to debate, and I'm going to debate him in September.
After I'm already locked in as the nominee, I mean, maybe he'll do better in that debate, but at that point, it won't matter.
But if the opportunity came up to do one between now and then, is there a sense of wanting to get back on the horse?
I'm on the horse. What I'm doing is going out and demonstrating to the American people that I'm in command of all my faculties, that I don't need notes, I don't need teleprompter. I can go out and answer any questions at all.
Did he really just say he had to prove whether or not he has command of all of his faculties? This is a horrible place to be in.
If you were to continue to run and be officially nominated, what happens if you have another episode like we saw during the debate?
Good question.
I don't plan on having another performance on that level.
Mr. President, it's always good to talk to you, good to see you. Thank you for making some time for us.
I definitely think this was better than the interview with George Stephanopoulos, but I really do think Joe Biden needs to have another debate before the convention to show that really was just a one-off, not wait until, hey, after I'm already nominated and I'm locked in as the presidential candidate, even if I completely tank the next debate, it won't matter, I'll hope for the best. Not just say I gave my good old jolly try when you keep saying that your opponent is an existential threat to democracy.